I was scared of making a really hard choice once in my life, and I didn't make it, and I let circumstances make the choice for me. And I have huge regrets about this to this day. So for me, I also use that as a touchstone that if I think I will regret this, fighting this fear, then I will step forward. Because I don't want to live with that feeling again. It was too painful.
Welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm Suzanne Weller, and this is a show about growth and unleashing what's possible. You will hear inspiring stories about what courage looks like, how we navigate what's getting in our way, and the opportunities that surface when we choose courage over comfort. Let's get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to The Courage Effect. I'm thrilled to have you here today. Today, we're going to be having a conversation about courage playing a role in cooking, for one thing, but also how it extends into our lives of having difficult conversations with people, how we engage in topics that people don't necessarily want to be having a conversation about, and how do we speak up when we feel that there is a truth or something that is core to who we are to make sure that we are heard, while at the same time having the courage to listen to other people's opinions. So, this is quite a broad selection there between cooking and those conversations. And the person that I'm having this conversation with today is Becky Selengut. Becky is a chef and cookbook author. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about her in a minute. I have been cooking Becky's recipes for a number of years. I own a number of her books. They have become in regular rotation in my kitchen, and I've done cooking classes with her. Becky brings so much energy and joy to her work and courage. She also really talks about using ingredients that we would usually just overlook, or maybe ingredients that are a bit scary for us. So, how do we have the courage to actually engage in cooking, experimenting, but also how does that roll into our larger lives? So, let me tell you a little bit about Becky Selengut. She is, as I said, an author, instructor, podcaster, and chef based in Seattle. Her books include Misunderstood Vegetables, How to Taste, Shroom, Good Fish, and Not One Shrine. Becky is the host and co host of the local foods podcast, Field to Fork. And when she is not the chef aboard the MV Theavos, which is, by the way, a boat, she forages, makes a mean Manhattan, and shares her life with her wife, April Pogue, and their lovely loony pointer mix, Izzy, and their semi-feral gray floof, Jinx. Becky, such a pleasure to have you here. Welcome to The Courage Effect.
That was a mouthful. I put a lot in there in that bio for you to chew on.
All good. There's so much good stuff. So let's kick off the show by talking about you. Because as I said before, you really bring all of you to how you cook. And I'd really like to talk a little bit more about you as not the cook and the chef, but you as you. So what makes Becky tick and how does courage thread into your life?
That was so interesting the way you even just said that. Like I guess I know that there's people who are able to put on different masks and different faces when they um are professional versus at home versus, with their friends or different people. And I've always been, um, I think envious is not the correct word, but I don't have that skill. I literally can't be some other form of myself, really. I can be a little less sweary and inappropriate, but only with lots of guidance from my wife and also, a talking to before I enter a room. And hopefully if I haven't had enough alcohol, I don't have that choice anymore. But it's just an interesting skill. And I never have had it. So for good or for bad, when I'm in different situations, I have a pretty consistent identity and sense of morality that follows me wherever I go. And it's very hard for me even to take on certain jobs if I can't be truly authentic to myself. It kind of is too hard for me. And I don't know, again, I don't think there's a judgment value on people who can and cannot do that or whatever. It's just, that's just the way I'm hardwired. And that does get me into quote unquote trouble sometimes.
Mm.
So where some people might be able to be quiet because it might create friction, or I just say how I feel. And sometimes people don't want to hear how you feel, or it goes against how they feel. And then things can be problematic. I have in certain times, like my wife grew up in a Southern Baptist evangelical family. Her father was a preacher, and they loved me. And I had to hold their hands and pray before meals in their home. And there were certain times where, I wanted to just be like, well, this is not my religion, blah, blah, blah. But I was able to certainly edit myself and be respectful in their space, even though I knew they thought I was going to hell. And my wife as well. So it's not that impossible for me to do it, but I have a hard time with it.
Yeah, and I respect that too. You're in those environments and you want to be respectful, but at the same time, it's hard when you're sort of the odd person out.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm often the odd person out because I'm sort of odd. Uh, I do like to travel. And when you travel, you definitely, you are sometimes in situations where, you, you have to be respectful of the home that you're walking into. At the same time, you don't want to disrespect who you are. And that's a quite a balance point, I think.
Yeah.
Um, Most recently, I was in Costa Rica in a Spanish immersion program, and I was living with um, a woman who was probably 20 years my senior. And as soon as I walked in, I saw the crosses on the wall and lots of Jesus imagery, and I was like, "Oh gosh, well, I'm too old to be closeted, and I won't be anymore. So this is going to have to be something that's communicated, and then if she's not okay with it, then I'm going to have to find a new place." And that's just one of those things where I kind of knew that as soon as I walked in that I couldn't be closeted anymore. And when she inevitably within 5 minutes asked me about my husband and my children that I don't have, I knew I'd have to cross that road. So, um, and it takes courage every time, honestly, to come out, especially in those situations where you're not sure I was alone. I didn't know anyone in the country and I was in a different situation. That takes courage, but it also felt safe. And so it's things like that I feel like when you have to be like me, pretty consistent, I often have to deal with fear and overcoming that fear.
How do you do that? I mean, I'm curious because I know that you've written a book in Tokyo and you've spent quite a bit of time in Asia. I'm curious how you've straddled that over time.
Well, I've also chose not to go to countries where I could be killed, for being gay, or it's likely that I would be. I have not traveled to certain countries for that reason, because I would have a hard time lying. Also look at me. It's hard. I'm a 6 foot tall woman who often gets misgendered. It would be a little bit hard for me to be closeted anyway. Um, and so I am safe in knowing what situations to put knowing how I am with that I have a hard time keeping quiet about things that I care about. I have a very strong compassion part of me and a very strong sense of justice. And those two things often are in conflict with each other. I care deeply about how other people feel, but I'm not to the point where they don't respect me. And so I find that those things are in conflict. And um, I grew up Jewish, not religiously Jewish. I did go to Hebrew school and to temple, and I was given I was basically made to be bat mitzvahed, but my father said, after you're bat mitzvahed at 13, you get to decide if you want to continue with your religious education. and I decided not to. And so I consider myself culturally Jewish. I feel Jewish because Judaism is one of the, I'm sure there people can talk about other religions being similar, but I only can speak from my own experience. It feels to me that, at least for Reform Judaism, it is a culture separate sometimes from the religiosity of it. And so I relate to the cultural aspect of it and how I was raised to be a good Jew, which I think is kind of how some people talk about being raised to be a good Christian at its roots, which is just to be a good person and to be a good member of society. So this is a very troubled time to be uh, Palestinian American or Jewish American or Palestinian or Israeli or any of those things these days. And so I've been thinking a lot about that and having to be courageous to sometimes have hard conversations with people who assume things about how I would feel right now.
Yeah.
And they're kind of wrong. You know, like I have people who want to bond with me because I'm Jewish about how they feel about being Jewish right now. And I am someone who right now is deeply conflicted, and also feel much more aligned with, honestly, with Gazans and their suffering, than I do with Jews and Zionism and wanting to feel safe in Israel. So it's not that I don't feel compassion and a great depth of mourning for Jews that have been killed, obviously, including people in my own family in the Holocaust. But what happened on October 7th obviously was horrendous, but I also know that it's cruel to treat people as the Palestinians have been treated for a very long time. And I don't think that Jews needing their own state is enough reason, enough country, their own country is enough reason to ever marginalize and oppress other people. And so that's where I've come out, and I've had to have hard conversations with family members about this and with other people who think that they know how I feel. And I've been protesting this war on the streets and have been accused by other Jews of being fighting, playing into the hands of Hamas, which I find very offensive. And I've had to stick up for my beliefs, and it's very hard because everything in our world right now is so binary. There's no gray anymore. And so where I'm fighting fear is to keep talking about the fact that we as human beings can hold multiple views that exist in the gray, that are not black or white, that are just difficult things to hold, but we're holding all of them.
Mhm.
And we can hold the desire for freedom of speech, even if someone is saying something's truly offensive to our ears. We can hold that Israelis, Jews, Muslims, Palestinians have done horrible things to each other, and none of them have been right. And we can grieve with all the people grieving, whatever their religion is. We don't have to listen to the people who say, oh, you have to pick a side.
You said that really beautifully. I mean, it's the whole there's no right answer to it. And you could still grieve for what's happening and not support it. Uh, how do I say this? I mean, you're not supporting behaviors and actions that are deplorable. I mean, there's so much that you're holding. There's so much complexity. And I don't think that we can live in one black or white area. I think that there's so much going on. And I've had times too where I'm like, how can I even bring an opinion to this? Because it impacts me as a human being. It doesn't impact me as somebody that is from that region or sits in the religion. But I want to know what's going on in the world. I want to not turn a blind eye to what's going on. And I want to speak out in support for what I believe in. And that is hard to be able to do that, but at the same time, not chastising people that have other beliefs as us.
Th- There's not a right answer here. There's just trauma for a lot of people. And I think um, hurt people. And this is like the best example of that is what's happening in the Middle East right now. I think you just have to stay true to your heart and also listen.
I know we're deep in this conversation. We do need to cut to an ad break, so apologies for the pause. Everybody, you're listening to The Courage Effect. We will be right back. Courage takes on many forms. I believe that one of the most courageous things that we can do is recognize when we need help and seek out support. Is something interfering with your happiness or keeping you from achieving your goals? If you're going through a hard time, possibly struggling with depression or anxiety, therapy can give you tools to approach your life in a very different way. That's why I'm excited to tell you about today's sponsor, BetterHelp. BetterHelp's mission is to make therapy more affordable and accessible. It's an online platform where you can be matched with a professional therapist in as little as a few days just by filling out a few questions. I know from personal experience that finding a therapist and the right fit can be really difficult. With BetterHelp, you can easily switch to a new therapist at no additional cost. For more information and to sign up to get matched with a therapist, go to BetterHelp, that's HELP.com/courage. Visiting this link both supports the show and gets you 10% off your first month of BetterHelp. So if you're struggling, consider online therapy with BetterHelp. Welcome back to The Courage Effect. I am in conversation with Becky Selengut.
I'm reading the book Covenant of Water right now by Abraham Verghese. Have you read that book?
No, it's on my list, and I actually recently finished his earlier book, Cutting for Stone, which is so beautiful.
He's one of my favorite authors, and he's so beautiful. The way he writes is so beautiful. And I know this is probably not something that he came up with, but he did mention like that this one character used their ears in the correct relation to the proportion between the ratio between the ears to the mouth, and listened twice as much as he ever spoke, this one character. And it was just, boy, do I wish that more of us would use our ears in the correct ratio to our mouths and like listen twice as much as you talk, and then try to stay true to your heart in your when you're speaking. I get what you're saying though, like, if I were not Jewish, if I were not Palestinian or Muslim, I would also feel like I don't know if I can have an opinion about this. But I think that we all should still speak with our hearts, even if we are not of that group, because if nothing else, there's incredible like Islamophobia and anti-Jewish anti-Semitism happening right now.
Yeah.
Like both groups are getting treated oppressively through this. And so as someone who is not of those groups, that's a good time to stand up and say, listen, I don't have a stake in this, but we can't be, hate is universal. And this is what's happening. Is that these people, whether you're Jewish or Muslim, Palestinian, Israeli, Israeli American, Palestinian American, these people are going to become the scapegoats for white nationalists. And that is already happening, So it's like, and that's why this particular battle is really hurting me, because I know it's ongoing, it's been going on forever, but it gets co-opted by people who have more power.
Oh, yes, very much so. And that's the thing. It's like so many of the conversations that I've had about allyship, right? I mean, how do you exist in this space? And how do I move the conversation forward without necessarily taking a stance, but at the same time standing up for what I believe in and making sure that I'm respecting people and also calling out the hate and disrespect I'm seeing at the same time?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, and no one wants to offend anyone, and no one wants to say the wrong thing, and then some people just don't care about that at all, clearly.
Yes. And I'm smiling because I know how hard that is. I mean, it's striking that balance, and it's such a hard thing to do. I mean, I don't even think it's balance. It's more about, when do we listen to our gut? When do we take the risk? And when do we understand when it's good fear as opposed to bad fear? if that makes sense. I mean, we're all going into these spaces. It's good that we get uncomfortable, but we need to be in areas where we don't necessarily know the right answer. And I have to say, and we have to be okay with that. But if it does go against our moral core, like you said, you just feel it inside, and we need to listen to ourselves.
And if I try to agree with other people or to make a dinner conversation go smoother, I can tell my heart hurts. I know I'm going away from my moral center. And that I get shaky when I have to say those things. And I know that that's when I'm going into my, like, I'm scared, right? I'm scared.
Mhm.
I was scared when I had to confront my dad when he was voting for Bush the second time. And I had to say to him, you realize you have a gay daughter, right? And like this guy just is going to make my life, he's going to literally make my life harder. I will have, less rights. I'll have less safety in the world because you're going to vote for him a second time when we know all of how he feels about um, queer people. And I knew I wasn't going to win that argument either, but like you just sort of have to kind of keep trying. Oh, it's hard. And then you have to also have the courage in a lot of ways to accept when you're just not going to get anywhere and to find the good parts of a relationship, even if you will never convince somebody of something too, which is also takes courage, which is acceptance.
Yes.
It's also about like for me, and I can't speak to anyone else, like what is going to be worse for me? So I make a calculated judgment call. Will it be worse for me if I go away from my what my heart is saying and what my moral center is saying? And will I feel ashamed that I didn't hold true to my values in that moment? Or will my relationship with this person suffer because I wasn't accepting of who they are and how they choose to, and I use my dad as a great example of that. Like my dad, for better or worse, has always voted based on fiscal priorities. And he loves me as hard as he can love me, but he is not like a P flag dad, right? He's not social stuff. He doesn't think it has any relevance to politics and how he votes. He votes based on his checkbook. And so he
Yeah.
ignores all the other stuff. That is something I can't even understand or fathom. Like, oh, so money's more important than your daughter and how this will affect my life. And he would say, no, but they shouldn't be doing anything with that anyway. I'm like, but they are. Well, but I don't vote based on that. Like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna blow up. But like, I have just learned that that is not something that that's not a battle I'm gonna win. It's gonna create tension and I'm gonna feel worse for really truly digging into that battle.
Yeah.
And so what's going to be more self-preserving for my heart? Because I don't want to bury myself in the battle. Do you know what I mean?
Yes. And I tend to think of it as regret. I mean, what regret do I want to have afterwards? What am I okay with holding on to? And would I rather regret something that I didn't do versus something that I did? And if I did it, then is it an okay regret versus just something that is so core to, the antithesis of who I am and who I want to be?
Yeah. And I was scared of making a really hard choice once in my life and I didn't make it and I let circumstances make the choice for me. And
Mhm.
I have huge regrets about this to this day. So for me, I also use that as touchstone that if I think I will regret this fighting this fear, then I will step forward because I don't want to live with that feeling again. It was too painful, and for me, I think you hurt other people when you act more out of fear than courage. Honestly, I think acting out of courage, you might step in it a bunch, but I feel like when you make decisions based out of fear, you end up screwing over yourself and other people. I don't know. Is that too harsh to say? Because I think there's a lot of reasons why you can be scared, and some of them are very legitimate and you self-protective. So it depends on where you're coming from, but I think that most of the times when I've been scared to say something, I regret not saying something
Mhm.
for me or doing something versus the times where I just feel like that sense of justice that, oh, I have to say something because I don't want this opinion not to be heard because then I'll be silenced and that's not good. And then uh, end up feeling bad because a relationship was strained because of it. And they already knew how I felt. I didn't need to keep going on it.
I think it's obvious depending on who you are and what patterns you fall into. I mean, how you were raised. And if you're somebody that's coming from a more disenfranchised place, then it's going to be different than if you're coming from somewhere where it's been privileged. And I think we're all dancing with fears at any given point. And I want to be able to to make a wise choice. I want to understand that I have choice when I have it. So how can I use it in a way that's going to be true to me and what I want to get out of it, as opposed to allowing somebody else to make that choice for me?
Yeah. And I think privilege, you're right about that. Like there is a certain privilege in being able to face a fear, and a lot of people don't have that. Like if you're, a survivor of a sexual abuse or, any kind of abuse, domestic violence, speaking up to someone who's hurting you that way, that you might not be able to do that for very wise reasons. And so listening to that wisdom, um, people who are white can speak up to injustice to, let's say, a police officer in a very tense situation because they have that privilege to do that without having that same lived fear that something bad, very bad, can happen to them for just speaking up about something. So like there's all these things that play into courage. Yeah, that's a really good point. I definitely, like, as a woman, you can't, and as a gay woman, like, there's certain things where I have chose not to do something because I listened to fear as being a source of wisdom and not fear as a stumbling block to a later regret. And I think there's good fear for that. That's a healthy fear. There's fear is not all bad.
Self-preservation.
Yeah, no, fear is hardwired to be listened to. It's just you have to tease out what's a good fear you should listen to and act appropriately on, and what's a fear that's something that you actually do have the ability to push up against and try to overcome. And that takes wisdom, I think. That does take wisdom. You have to have tried a bunch of things for a bunch of time and be old to then know which one you're going to do. And I think that is the wisdom of being me over 50 that I hope that I can give to my friends that are younger than I am, help them with that. Although you sometimes just have to live it.
Such a good point. Because I think about, when kids are so young, they just hurl themselves at the world, like because they don't know any better. There's a certain amount of just, you know, pushing themselves into the world. And I don't necessarily think that that's courage because they haven't really learned it yet. Um, but I mean, to your point, like wisdom, it can be great because when we get to a point of understanding, I've done that and it didn't kill me, then I can keep going. Whereas sometimes it's good not to know what the consequences are because they might potentially hold you back.
Yeah, true. I mean, being naive gets you into all kinds of next level experiences.
Oh, yeah, too true. As we shift the conversation, you obviously work in cooking in a male dominated industry. Are there any challenges that you're willing to share with us today?
So, talking about wisdom, like we have the wisdom to know when it's okay to confront something and when it's not okay. And there's been certain times in my life where I've had jobs where I knew I would lose this job if I confronted certain things in the job, like sexism, homophobia, sexual harassment that I was experiencing, that a lot of women working in male dominated spheres, like I do, experience. And there are times when I confronted it knowing I could lose my job, but was okay losing the job. And then there were times that I had to deal with it in different ways, more subtle ways, not going over someone's head. But, there was a time that a sous chef grabbed my ass when I was working, and I didn't even have time to really think, but I just grabbed their hand and just looked them in the eye and just said, "Don't do that again." And I know that a lot of people might not have the courage to be able to confront in that moment. I was, and I had the privilege because I haven't been abused in my life and had the strength in that moment, and that solved that problem. It didn't happen again for me in that way, but there's been other times where, I have sat quietly by and I've seen my colleagues ignore basic other people treating me or someone else poorly and not stand up for me and not stand up for other people. And I've just sort of, silently just dealt with that because I felt so outnumbered in the job I was in, but I knew I wanted to keep that job for other reasons so that I could get ahead, so I could get the experience and whatever. And then there's been times where I directly confronted um, a boss of mine for inappropriate sexual comments to me on the job. I went directly to them. I didn't go over their head where I could probably have gotten them fired. I went directly to them. And that was one of the scariest things I've ever actually done, I'd say, in my whole life. Um, I'm not sure why that was so scary, but it was very scary for me.
Yeah.
It took all my strength to just sort of one on one, tell actually, it wasn't even one-on-one. I brought a female colleague with me for safety
Mm.
to tell this person exactly how that made me feel.
How did it end up?
Well, for a bunch of other reasons, this person is no longer someone who I have to work with anymore. Um, it was a sign of a lot of other things, is all I'll say. It was not the as is typical when you're seeing one very strong aspect of something that is, incorrect, immoral, not respectful, you're going to see a whole bunch of other things. The problem solved itself, but I am so proud of myself for that moment. And I look back on that, and when you asked me to do this podcast, like that is the first thing that came to my head was that moment because I was so scared. And yet I knew from the moment I decided to say something to him that that was the right thing to do and that I was going to feel so much better on the other side of it. And I'm so, it's like people are, oh, what's the most thing that you're most proud of? Your book success. No, it was standing in front of this person and telling him that what he did was wrong and why it was wrong
Yeah.
and how he should never do that again.
I'm really glad that you did it because a lot of the time we don't. So I want to acknowledge you for that. And I mean, I think back to so many conversations when we've seen like bad behavior and we haven't said anything. So, it's important for us to say it not just for ourselves, but for other people. And it can be incredibly difficult. So, and I think even more difficult when we're doing it for ourselves. So, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. I think saying something on behalf of someone else is so the right thing to do whenever you can do it. And I honestly, sometimes I look for opportunities to do that because I feel like it takes, for me, less courage than the thing about myself. Even though you might very well be putting yourself in harm's way to do that for sure. But for me, the things that cause me the greatest fear are the things that hit hit my trauma points, right? That hit me personally. And that's where I get shaky and scared and feel like I can't do it. But if I see someone, you know, making a Islamophobic comment near me, I feel like I can throw myself into that and be like, that is wrong. Do not do that, or whatever, because it's not hitting my trauma necessarily.
Yeah, but I think even more reason to do it, right? I mean, because it's just like understanding for that person because they're likely to be in the same situation as you are.
I guess I would love anyone who listens to this who has not experienced any lucky enough in their life to not experience any kind of trauma to understand that they should never ever say to certainly a woman again, like, why didn't you do anything, like during like rape or sexual harassment, or why didn't you do anything? And it's like, oh my God, you obviously don't know that freeze moment, because that is such a real thing and it's real in nature. Animals do the same thing. They just, you can fight, you can run away, or you can just literally stand there and do nothing and leave your body. And that happens a lot. And it's happened to me where I just didn't say anything because I was like in shock. Such a great topic. And I love this idea for a podcast. And I really appreciate the time to talk through some of this stuff. It's like, it's heavy stuff, but it's really important.
No, I really appreciate you. I love how bold you are and how courageous you are.
You. I know that this was so much fun. Just kidding. Yeah, this is not the fun version of me, but it's hard to crack jokes when you're talking about the Middle East.
I know, but these are the tensions that we hold and we sit in this complexity every day. And I'm glad that we talked about it. So thank you for going there. And I want to make sure that we talk about your book, Misunderstood Vegetables, since you're promoting it right now. So please talk to us a little bit about it.
Oh gosh, yeah, it seems so insignificant after that conversation. But yes, you still have to eat. And I like to think my newest book is how I treat people too, which is that, like, misunderstood vegetables, a lot of people just judge vegetables they don't understand as other and bad and weird and ugly. And it's how I think about not treating other people in the world. So it's like making things that are unusual, unknown, maligned, much more approachable. And that's what the cookbook is designed to do.
No, I love it, love it, love it. It's a great book. I love all the recipes that I've cooked out of it. I know I took the class with you as well, early on before you actually came out with a book to cook like rutabaga and some stuff that had never made its way into my rotation. But I will never forget the first time that I actually bought and cooked celery root. And when I saw it in the store, I mean, it looked like this weird, like small, rocky sort of brain. And it was one of the best things I've ever tasted. So I have to say, I do not, after that experience, judge a vegetable by its cover.
Do not judge a person, a vegetable, or anything by its cover. They're just hiding these wonderful joys and secrets, and you won't ever know and appreciate it unless you challenge your assumptions and biases about it. So
Yes, I love it. Becky, thank you so much for being here. Such a pleasure. And I really look forward to cooking more of your recipes and seeing you again soon.
thank you, Suzanne.
Well, we just took you on quite a journey. A few things that really sit with me following that conversation is the courage to speak up, to engage in dialogue, to advocate for ourselves, and at the same time, advocating for other people. And the whole idea of not falling into judgment as often as we tend to, really staying more curious. And I love that whole idea of spending twice as much time listening as we do talking. We can all learn from each other, and we also want people to be able to learn from us. So how can we strike some sort of delicate balance between those things where we're not just having damaged potential relationships, but move them forward by having difficult conversations? And again, as I said, curiosity, not just to, potentially wonder what other people are thinking or experiencing, but curiosity in the kitchen, curiosity in the market, to look at things and not be afraid of what they look like, and to pick up that weird vegetable, to pick up something that we haven't tried before, and to bring it home and to actually try it on for size to see what we're able to do with it. Thank you for a great conversation, Becky, and thank you to all of you for listening. Take care, stay courageous. The Courage Effect is brought to you by Weller Collaboration. We're a team of talented coaches, executive advisors, and consultants who partner with our clients to enhance their leadership, become more adaptable, and to really get out of their own way to work more effectively together. More information about Weller Collaboration is available via the links in our show notes. Please spread the word about the Courage Effect. Rate and review your favorite episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your favorite podcast platform. Share with your colleagues, family, or anyone in your universe who might be inspired by a good dose of courage. If you have feedback, thoughts, or would like to apply to be a guest, please contact us via our website. Benny Mathers is our producer. Dave Nelson composed our theme music. Alex Sandyforth is our administrative maven. And I'm your host, Suzanne Weller.